Police are calling a paint attack on a central Auckland rainbow crossing a hate crime.
We don't have specific hate crime offences in New Zealand.
Wellington lawyer Graham Edgler.
When you're talking about hate crime, you're talking about things which are already illegal. So assaulting someone is illegal, burgling someone's house, vandalism is illegal. And so all those things are already crimes. So it's a question of in what way is it worse, or how do you define it to be worse because of the nature of the victim? Certain sorts of things would be easier to prosecute as hate crimes. The difference between vandalism, throwing a brick through a window, which could have a hate element to it, versus vandalism, painting a swastika on the side of a Jewish person's house.
But a hate crime law may be on the horizon. The Law Commission has been instructed to look at hate-motivated offences.
As a coalition agreement said, we've stopped them from carrying on with hate speech legislation reform because that's not something we're going to do, but we have asked them to continue their work on hate crimes.
So in saying that, we'll let this play out, and we won't start the conversation too much now. It's interesting that the national government is still pushing towards hate crime laws. Now, we can talk about what the difference are, but I guess if you had asked me what my bet would have been, it would have been that they'd probably move away from those as well, but they're not. I don't know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but either of you guys want to share anything on that before we keep going?
I think the thing with we're not going to do hate speech, but we are going to do hate crimes. I think the thing that they've missed there is that it doesn't just start with the crime. It's the incitement, it's the working up to it and that sort of thing. Again, we talk about getting into something early. Someone talking in a message board about something, somebody's got to do something about the local mosque and all of this sort of stuff. That it's not a crime. Maybe it should be.
Byron?
One thing it made me think back to when I was studying criminology quite a few years ago now. But one of the key things I took away from that class I took when I was an undergraduate at university was crime is normal in any society, but the rate of crime changes based on various factors. So if you're wanting to reduce crime, there are policies you can put in place that will reduce the rate of crime. And I think if we're going to start looking more at hate crime, and I think what would be really good is just documenting when a crime is hate motivated, which I understand. I think police are already starting to do that. Yep. And I think what we're going to find from that, though, is that we could probably reduce hate motivated crime if we do something about the spread of hate speech. And I think we can compare, hate crime here to hate crime in countries in Europe where there are much stronger hate speech laws. And probably what we're going to find from looking at that is that if we want to reduce those kinds of crime, doing something about the spread of hate speech online, whether that is legislative or whether that is through different policies for the social media platforms, or whether it's something else again, that's probably going to be what this data is going to lead us to.
When they were talking about it in there, the lawyer said it's already illegal, and then he went about the hate crimes. He went on to start by saying, how is it worse? I thought to make something a hate crime, for example, it would be, what's the reason behind it? It may or may not be worse, but if they're committing the crime because the person's Jewish, or because the person's African American, or because whatever. To me, if it was going to be a hate crime, I guess the same as hate speech, is if the reason you're doing it is because of that person's protected class. That's how I think about it. But the gentleman we're looking at right now is the spokesman from the Islamic Federation of New Zealand. They've obviously got some things to say about this. Let's keep going, eh?
He actually thoroughly confused what he's actually wanting.
In a prayer room off Lambton Quay, Abdul Razak shares his astonishment that hate speech has been dropped. He heads the Royal Commission Committee for Local Islamic Organisations.
They're researching the possibility of bringing in hate crime legislation. You're supportive of the hate crime legislation?
Absolutely, but the two are so interlinked. And this clearly stated in the Royal Commission report that you need to look at the expression of hate as part of the hate crime legislation.
Following the Royal Commission report, hate speech reforms were proposed by former Justice Minister Chris Farfoy, watered down by the next Labour Justice Minister Kiri Allen, and vigorously campaigned against by the coalition parties in the lead-up to the election.
Our simple belief is that in a free and open society, the best response to speech that you don't like is more speech, rather than police prosecutions.
The Free Speech Union is claiming a chunk of the credit for the dumping of hate speech.
Without a doubt, we were the leaders in the space saying that hateful speech can be a problem, but censorship is not the answer.
Very good one.
Scotland's new hate crime laws were expected to meet a backlash, and here it was on day one.
Scotland's new law, which came into effect earlier this past week, will be keenly observed from here.
Scotland has changed it. It's been somewhat controversial, and I think their law appears to sort of both address hate crime as well as hate speech.
What we've seen in the UK generally, and specifically in Scotland, is this as an ideological rod to beat the backs of opinions that are out of favour at the moment.
It's all about the wording. If you get the wording wrong, you're going to have the same disaster that Scotland is now facing.
You think that's a disaster?
Of course it's a disaster. They didn't have that discussion. So now you have a situation like a very prominent person, J.K. Rowling, saying, hey, I can be accused of hate crime. If I believe in the two-gender approach, it's hate crime.
So I actually think that's quite a good place to start the conversation proper, because you guys tell me if you took this differently, right? But what I just heard Abdul Razak say is that he doesn't think J.K. Rowling should be charged with a hate crime for acknowledging, saying, stating there are only two genders. But there are others out there who think that should be hate speech or a hate crime. And that comes back to that part about who decides. And I think it's a valid question to ask, even though some horrific Atlas network-backed groups also ask that question. Byron, what about your thoughts?
Well, my understanding is that under that legislation they have in Scotland, she wouldn't be charged with a hate crime for saying that, because she has said that, and Scottish police have said, no, we're not going to be going and arresting J.K. Rowling. So I think that demonstrates that there's going to be a high bar for hate speech. And that's what the case has been here as well, when there's been proposals for changes to our existing legislation. Like we already have on the books in the Human Rights Act from 1993, a clause that makes it a crime to incite racial disharmony. So based on somebody's national or ethnic or racial origins. And the time that clause has been used is I think twice, maybe three times in that 30 years, because there's an incredibly high bar. And a lot of what was proposed when we were talking about hate speech laws was just amending that to include religious groups and to include the LGBT community and the disabled. There was also talk of maybe moving it out of the Human Rights Act and into the Crimes Act. But we allowed the debate to really get hijacked by, I think, some disingenuous actors who talked as if suddenly the government was going to come and arrest you for posting, a woman as an adult human female on Twitter or something like that, which was never really going to be the case.